Bismillahirrahmanirrahim and Assalamu alaikum. Today we are going to discuss another poem that is a far cry from Africa. This poem is written by Derek Walcott and it was published in 1962. Now, the basic thing that this poem deals with is split identity. How does it deal with split identity? How do we come to know that the split identity is playing a pivotal role in the mind of the poet? We'll come to this discussion in the last section of the poem. Uh, as far as the meter is concerned, so this poem is written in free verse, and there are two stanzas, unequal stanzas. One comprises of 21 lines and the other one is of 11 lines. This is just a brief introduction to the poem. Moving ahead, we need to understand why this poem was written, why Derek Walcott got motivated to write this poem, or in simple way, what was the background to this poem. So as far as the reality is concerned, we all know that the Western countries or the European countries, they wanted to show their superiority, they wanted to express their power, they were hungry for the manifestation of their power, and at the same time they were hungry for the hidden treasures in Africa as well as in Asia. So uh, in the first half of 20th century, like other countries, they started venturing into this Kenyan region. In Kenya, they went there, they got settled, and in settling over there, they destroyed many of the places of the native people. They killed a number of natives, and similarly, they destroyed their farms and they destroyed their crops so that they can get benefited, and the natives become more and more dependent on them. But when they went to Africa, the natives, Kikoyo, they started their plan of resistance. Like, obviously, when a colonizer with a mission to colonize another country, another region, another part, or another nation, so the nation that is going to be suppressed does not accept it easily, because they have their own identity, they have their own culture, they have their own customs and traditions. So how can they how can they accept the cultural traditions and everything that is being brought from the outside? Same was the case with the natives of Kenyan region, the Kikoyo clan. So what happened, uh, inside that Kikoyo clan, some of the people, they organized a protest. Then from that protest, they organized basically an organization that was later on called as Mau Mau. And the basic aim of this Mau Mau organization was to brutally kill the European settlers, white people, and all those people from the natives who were going to take side with the whites. So this was their mission. And on the other hand, the white people, their mission, and they were of the view that they needed to kill those violent people, those protesters, those who showed resistance, so that they could actually and they could easily control the region. So in 1950s or in mid 1950s, this conflict or this uprising was becoming more and more violent. More and more people were getting into it. Some on the sides of Kikoyo people, the natives who wanted to stay calm, who wanted their own nation to be free from the white people. Some wanted to be on the side of whites because they got impressed with the culture, they got impressed with the ways and traditions and lives of the European people, because they were like they having luxury of life, they were having every facility. And at the same time, those Kenyan people, those African people, they were deprived of the basic necessities, the basic facilities. So obviously when they saw the glimpse of that Western culture, they got impressed and they wanted to be like them. So around three factions formed: one, white people who wanted to dominate the African; One was the native Africans who wanted to stay, who wanted to be who they were actually, and the one who wanted to kill the whites and who wanted to throw them out of their land. So these three factions were playing their role in the battleground, and these uprisings, they were moving far behind the actual limits. Like hundreds and thousands were getting killed, and people were not having actual life. People were not having the life of calm, the life of peace. So this poem is basically written in the backdrop of this conflict, this Mau and white settlers conflict, and the way the innocent people got killed in between, in that conflict. So this is the background of the poem. Now moving ahead towards the main crux of the poem, the main summary of the poem, uh, beautiful scenic expressions are used to depict the beauty of African region, and then the white settlers arrive and their bloodshed and their domination and their suppression of the natives is depicted. And then later on, the in the last part, Derek Walcott, he poses some questions. He wants to ask some questions, and then he wants to and then he tries to answer those questions. So this is the basic crux of the poem. Once you go and read the text, there is nothing difficult in the poem, so one can easily understand what is being told and what the writer wants to convey from the words. Now, coming from the perspective to analyze this poem, starting from the title, A Far Cry from Africa. Now, this title has got different meanings. One can analyze, one can interpret it in different ways, in different sections. The first thing is that the writer has used far cry. He has not used far shout. He has not used any other word. He has directly used cry. Now, cry is usually from the person, from the subject that is being dominated, that is being suppressed, and that does not have any voice. So what he does, he cannot raise voice for himself, so he cries out his heart. So the writer wants to show us that the natives, the people of the land, Kenyan region, they cried. Why they cried? Because they were suppressed. They were dominated by the colonizers, the colonial power, the colonial policies, and they were the people who got deprived of their lands, who got deprived of their lives, who got deprived of their families, and at the same time they got deprived of their identity, of their culture and their customs as well. So they were on the position where they lost everything. They gained nothing. They just saw the glimpses of Western culture, but they lost everything. So a far cry from Africa, we can analyze that a far cry is the cry of the suppressed people, and they gain nothing. Another interpretation of the title could be that it was a far cry from Africa. A far cry means a cry that was not getting any notice, that was not getting any attention of the people from the rest of the world. Whatever was happening, the colonizers had their own expression, and they expressed that they wanted to colonize because they wanted to enlighten the people, they wanted to civilize the people, they wanted to give them education, they wanted to give them the basic facilities and the basic necessities. So that is why the writer might be thinking that it is a far cry, and the far cry is that it is not striking the conscience of the people of the world. So this way it can be interpreted that it is a far cry. Another an optimist approach could be that the far cry from Africa, the writer might be thinking, and or we might be able to understand that the far cry from Africa is that the people are being suppressed, the people are being brutally killed, the people are being dominated, and their cries in the far region of Kenya or a far region of Africa, it is coming to us. We are able to listen to those cries, those brutalities, and the like curses of those native people who are being uh, who are being made to suffer, who are being thrown into the dangers and the brutalities of colonizing mission. So these are different levels of the uh, title, that we get an idea what actually is the message behind this poem, or what actually is being told. So this is how this title is analyzed. Now, as we've talked about it, this poem is the poem of resistance. How is it resistance? It is a resistance on the part of the natives against the colonizers. Now, the colonizers, they started this colonizing mission, white man's burden, because they wanted to enlighten the world. They thought of themselves as superior people, as kids of God, and they thought that they were the enlightened people. They had everything. They had the real purpose and meaning of life, and all those who were not Christians or who were outside their own region, they were the inferior people, they were the others. So they wanted to civilize them, they wanted to give them the basic purpose of life. Although this was what was expressed through literature and print media, but the basic motive was very much commercial. The basic motive was very much market oriented. They wanted to expand their markets, they wanted to go loot the resources, plunder the resources, and then come back with a lot of money. So that was the basic purpose of their colonizing mission, and on the surface they wanted to civilize the nation. So the poem is showing the resistance, or manifesting the resistance of the people, the native people, who thinks that their roots, their integrity, their culture, their own identity as a nation is very much okay. They are fine with it. They do not need that civilizing mission, they do not need that enlightenment, they do not need that coming of the European settlers with the promise, with the aim to provide them the facilities and necessities, because whatever they had, they were okay with it, they were spending their lives in a good way. So this poem is basically a resistance, because in the first or second line we see corpses are scattered through a paradise. Now, what is paradise? Paradise is a very calm, a serene place where there is happiness, where there is no brutality, where there is nothing of unpeaceful, where there peace prevails. So this African region was like a paradise. Though they had difficulties of life, but they were happy. They had their family bonds, they had their cultural bonds, they had their uh, uh, heritage. So they were happy with it. But those Western people, those colonizers, they came, and what they did, they just scattered corpses and brutality in that paradise of Africa. So this is how this poem is the poem of resistance. And you can see the resistance of the native people when they form the organization Mau Mau, and they start killing the white people. Why? Because they think that these whites have looted their land, they have made them deprive and made them dependent on the whites. So the natives, they start this uprising, they kill them, and they want to snatch back their identity and their land and their resources. Then the colonizing mission, one can say that yes, those colonizers were very much fine with them, because they brought the facilities, they brought education, they brought everything. But keep this thing in mind and remember it, that whatever they brought it inside the ideology of their own nation. Like, if Britishers came to Asia, Britishers came with their own purposes, with their own benefits. Although they did something good for the people of Asia, but on the major part, they deprived them of their necessities. In the African region, they did this thing as well. They looted, they plundered, and they made them dependent for the basic necessities of life as well. So the native resistance was because for their own identity, and the colonizing mission was dominating them because they had their own reasons, they had their own benefits, and they had their own emotions. Now, in that process of domination and resistance, what happened, that a small faction of people, what they did, they got the glimpse of Western culture, they got the glimpse of English as a language, and they got attracted to that life. They got attracted to that life, and they wanted to be like the masters, the other faction, because they were slaves, they were treated as slaves. So those slaves wanted to be like masters, and they started adopting their culture, their norms, their values. Even they started copying their language, they wanted to learn it. So what happened, that they slowly and gradually they became hybrid identities, as Homi K. Baba puts it. Now, what is a hybrid identity? A hybrid identity is that you have got your own cultural roots, you have got your own identity, but at the same time you want theirs identity, you want the identity of masters, you are impressed with the culture and way of life of the masters, the colonizers masters. So what happened, that they started developing these hybrid identities. Hybrid identities were the amalgamations or the mixtures of both identities, at the same time their own cultural identity, and at the same time those ways of life which the colonizers brought. So this ambivalent behavior was creating these conflicts, because they could neither leave their own cultural identity, cultural roots, nor they could move to the ranks of the masters, because masters were never able to accept them as their own or as equal people. Now, what happened in that those ambivalent behaviors, those ambivalent identities, they created the conflicts in the minds of people. They started this trauma in the mind, that they belong to neither their own nor the masters. So what they did, they started uprising against, they started revolting against the masters, because they were no one like. This created the problem, this created this Mao organization, because of those hybrid identities, because of those ambivalent. Now, ambivalent behaviors or ambivalent identities were the identities which belong to neither of them. Like the cultural identities were now gone. Why? Because they were impressed with the Western ideals, and at the same time Western ideals were not in their approach, in their reach. Why? Because they were the masters and they could not give their equality to those slaves. So these cultural identities, these ambivalent behaviors, and those hybrid identities, they created the conflict behind those uprisings, behind those problems. And what happened, everyone was having a split identity where he wanted to be an Englishman, but at the same time he wanted to have his own religious views as well. So this created a problem, and the African people, like, they are suffering today as well. Why? Because of those split identities, because neither of them is a pure European nor is a pure African, because of those amalgamations, because of those impressing ideal. So this is going on, and this might be going on for a very long time, though they are now a free nation, they are having a free state, but their mentality is still in those colonial minds. Although the colonial masters have long gone, but the mentality, the approach is still there. And this is what actually the poet is going through. This poet is having the grandmothers from African background and his grandfathers from European background. So he is not a pure European nor a pure African, and he is having that problem of identity as well. And in the end, as we have talked about it, that the split identities, so this poet is actually searching his own real identity, whether he should side with the native African who are trying to resist against the white masters, or he should be with the white masters who are trying to dominate the people. And he asked these questions in the end. Like, he asked it, How can I face such slaughter and be cool? Like he has those African roots, so how can he be cool when he sees that slaughters? How can I turn from Africa and live? And he cannot turn from Africa. But at the same time, between this Africa and English, tongue I love. He loves English as well. So this poem is basically talking about the resistance, and at the same time, Derek Walcott is trying to ransack his own identity, to ransack his own sympathies, and he wants to make himself clarify that where he stands, whether he is with the African or with the English masters. And the poem ends with this confusion because there is no clear-cut answer to it. He can neither sympathize with the Africans nor with the white masters. This is the crux, and this is the main ideas behind the poem. If you have got any question, you can ask or you can relate it into the comment box. Thank you very much. Allah Hafiz.